and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have an amazing guest, Timothy Freeman. Timothy is the Chief Operating Officer for Evans Memorial Hospital and the founder of Career Connector. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Timothy Freeman.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the grand introduction. That sounds exciting.
I'm so excited, Timothy. I cannot wait to dive in. We had a conversation before, and as our listeners know, if they have been listening for a while, I am so incredibly passionate about career transitions, how we find our purpose in our career, and just over life transitions as well. Of course, we talk about life, career, and sport on this podcast. So I cannot wait to dive right in. So Timothy, if you could please begin with an introduction and a background of yourself.
Of course. And once again, thank you so much for allowing me to be on the podcast and allowing me to be, in a position to share not only about my experience in healthcare, but also about Career Connector as well. But I'm born and raised from Savannah, so local guy to Savannah. Went to Armstrong Atlantic before it became Georgia Southern, got a nursing degree. And I always tell people the same thing. I really, at that time, coming out of high school, my mother was a nurse. My dad wanted me to be a nurse, and I just did not have any interest in it. My mother's background was labor and delivery, and to me at the time, that's all I really knew about nursing. And so I said, that's not for me. But I listened to my dad's advice, and the takeaway was no matter what you do and no matter where you go, if you have RN behind your name, you'll be in a better position than if you don't. So I pushed through. I got a degree from Armstrong, and one of the only people that when I graduated still did not have a job lined up. Took state boards without a job lined up, and then finally decided, okay, I got to do something. So I went to the last place that I did clinicals, which was day surgery at St. Joseph's Hospital here at St. Joe's Candler in Savannah. Went up to the lady that I did my practicum with, which was Connie Frazier, and said, hey, do you think they're hiring? And she said, I don't know. You can talk to them. So I ended up talking to the lady that was the manager of the OR at that time. She said, we don't have any positions. We just hired, some new grads, but you're more than welcome to drive over to Candler and talk to them. So I did. Drove over to Candler Hospital. I met with the lady that was the manager there, and she gave me the opportunity. She said, if you want to shadow for 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, let's talk on Friday and see if this is something you're interested in. So that was my introduction into nursing beyond all the clinicals. After the 3 days there, I went back, I interviewed with her, and I liked what I saw. She liked what she saw. And so there you go. That was the introduction. So from no experience in nursing to working right in the OR was my very beginning. But I'll tell you, working in the OR, I did that for 2 years and absolutely loved it. I got to work with people like Ginger Loy, who to me she is the lady as a scrub tech that I would say, mentored me into nursing, if you will, adopted me into your nose and throat service line. And from there, over time, you get to meet people, watch people. And I really enjoyed watching what the CRNAs did, just the calmness under pressure that they have, that calmness under duress. I mean, to me, that was a thing where I said, I don't know how they get that, but that's what I want. So I had people there literally that I work with every day as CRNAs, from Glenn Martin to Janet Pilkington to Tommy Kim. And you can just ask them, hey, what do you like your job? What do you like about your job? What's hard? What's challenging? If you could do it again, would you stick with it? All these different questions. I think plenty of people have for CRNAs, but for me, I was so fortunate to be working side by side with them 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I could just ask those questions in between cases. So that's what I decided after 2 years I wanted to do. I wanted to go back to CRNA school because I really wanted what they had. And to do that, you have to go through the ICU for nursing. That's where you get critical care experience. And so I went from the OR overnight to the night shift in ICU. And, talk about a steep learning curve where you're going from an environment where you have a surgeon, you have your anesthesia provider who's doing your critical thinking, you have a what they call it, a certified surgical technologist right there, scrub tech. You've got all these people around you in the room, so they're just really brilliant minds. Then you get to the point where you're starting out as a nurse by yourself at ICU, and you realize quickly that the people that you have that back you up are the people that they're just like you. So you start learning your resources really quickly. But from there, I wanted to expand my knowledge base beyond critical care. I mean, Carrie McCartney at that time said to me, you want to grow your experience, you want to, set yourself apart from candidates in the CRNA pool, you should join the float pool. So you kind of operate where you give them availability and they send you where they need you. And that really opens up your experience level from med surg to ICU to PCU to ER inpatient holding. And so you go all these different places. You learn a lot really quick. And that was a great experience for me to say ground level, very beginning. I'm going to figure out what are the nuances of this department before I get too far into the actual work itself, because every place is a little different. But love what I did there. Ended up deciding, you know what, I'm ready to come back to the place that I enjoyed working the most, that had the most, I felt like, autonomy. And that was the Cancer Intensive Care Unit where I'd done the night shift work. So after about 2 years in float pool, came back to ICU. And at that time, I just, you see all these places and then you have a different appreciation for why you like things. And starting there, and I had an opportunity to apply for a resource coordinator position. And at that time, it was a pretty short staff unit, but my whole thought process was, even watching my mom come home from work and having some challenging days, I myself having challenging days, I wanted people to have a better work experience than I originally had when I first started. So that's where I think, that innately, the leadership, kind of is formed, is that you want something for somebody else better than what you had. So I started volunteering for the charge nurse, applied for the resource coordinator role, got it, did that for a couple of months, almost a year. And then the same nurse manager for critical care that had hired me back twice left. It opened up an opportunity to be manager of a 20-bed ICU, 14-bed PCU. And the director came to me and said, hey, I've done a lot of interviewing with people and, there's a lot of challenges that we have. But one thing that keeps coming up as a positive is your name. And so I think you should definitely, based on feedback from your peers, put your application in. And I told him, I just got settled into this role. I was kind of thinking this is what I was going to do till I retire, and I was comfortable with it. And I guess that's a key phrase. I was probably too comfortable, very comfortable with it. And, once again, went back to my dad and said, hey, this is where I'm at. And, my dad's advice was, if somebody thinks you should apply, I think you at least owe them, because of who they are, respect for their position, you should at least put application in. So applied for it. To my surprise, I got it. So in, graduating nursing school in May of 2010, and now here we are in November 2017, only 7 years for a kid who didn't want to be a nurse, and now he's in a nurse leadership role, kind of surprising. But I'll tell you, having Antonio Arata as my director first starting out, I remember he told me at the very beginning, one thing I will not do is throw you the keys to the filing cabinet and say, go get it. He said, I'll make sure we sit down, we spend time together. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to mentor you. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to train you. I'm going to show you how I want you to run this department. And for me, that was literally one of the biggest, I think, inflection points in my leadership career, was having somebody, and really the importance of mentorship, sit down with intention and show you, I'm going to walk through things with you. So from there, in 2017, we hired a bunch of people. We had a great time. We have great relationships with the nursing programs in town, Georgia Southern in particular. From there, we grew the department. We went into COVID. On the other side of COVID, I got a phone call from one of the folks who works in the OR, the same OR I started at, who said, hey, our nurse manager just left. We've heard about things that you've done up there in the ICU and critical care, and we think you'd be a great fit to come back home to the OR. Once again, I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I've put literally blood, sweat, tears into this department. We've over, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, built it out to what it is. Most of the people here I know because I hired, we've got great infrastructure, and I just not ready to walk away from that. But, and I'll mention it later, I'm sure, in the interview, but one of those things that you learn is, when you start saying no, you start closing off opportunities. And my dad's point was, whether you get the job or not really up for discussion. It's all about the fact that somebody called you, they approached you, and they said they think you should apply. And so I think you owe it to them. So I applied and got the job to manage the OR at Keller Hospital. And part of that interview process was with Dr. Ed Richards, who told me, I'll give you my vote, but in order for you to get my vote, you got to go back to school. And I don't want you just going back to any school. I don't want you to get any degree. I want you to get a master's in business, and I want you to get it from a top 25 university. I didn't want to go to school the first time, so I thought I definitely don't want to go to school the second time. And so I picked, number one university in the whole land. I know for a fact I'll never get into the University of Notre Dame, but I'll satisfy his request and I'll apply. And sure enough, I applied, I got an interview, and then they made me an offer to start an MBA program there. So going back to the OR, kick off executive MBA program in South Bend, and it was one that allowed me to stay in my full-time role in Savannah, commute once a month to South Bend, so you still get the Notre Dame experience, and then you have your full-time job as well. So during my tenureship in the OR, decided, okay, I'm ready to continue to push. I want to grow. Brene Brown always says, get ready to make big bets. So I made a big bet and went to HCA. So in Savannah, St. Joe Candler is a dual system, multi-system hospital setup. HCA is a Memorial Hospital. It's level 1 trauma, but they had a position for director of med surg. And so I applied for it. I got it and said, here we go. So I worked there for 7 months. Originally, I'd signed a 2-year commitment to stay there, and that was my plan. But I got a phone call from somebody who said, hey, the CEO at Evans Memorial Hospital in Claxton, Georgia, wants to talk to you. He needs a chief nursing officer. And, I originally remember thinking, when I get through the MBA program, that's the goal. Eventually, I want to get to a C-suite position. Having worked in a role under Sherry Danello, who's a chief nursing officer at St. Joe Candler, and learning under her and seeing all the things she had done, I said, that's the goal. That's where I want to be. So I ended up interviewing for the CNO position at Evans. And I'll tell you, the thought was, I know one day I want to get there. I just didn't realize how soon the opportunity was going to show up. But it showed up, so I pursued it full court press. I had a chance to do it, and so in February 2023, started as chief nursing officer in a rural hospital in Evans County, and then graduated from the executive program at Notre Dame in May of 2023. And then you get to this point where you're doing all these things, you're still wanting to grow, and Mr. Hinchy told me one time, ambition can be an Achilles heel, and I think he's right. You definitely don't want to outshoot your skill set. But here I was thinking, how do I continue to grow, even if it's beyond nursing and healthcare? How do I get there? So I had applied for an administrative fellowship position at Vanderbilt University, but with the medical center in Nashville. Got accepted. My wife, she was kind enough to eventually agree to move with me to Nashville. And shock of shocks, right before the move, after the house was on the market, the program stops. And so I go back to my CEO and said, oh my gosh, I don't have a job. And we sat down, and between Bill, who's the CEO now, Bill Lee, and John Wiggins, the CFO, they said, we know you want to get into operations. We know you want to be a chief operating officer. So we'll take a look and see what that looks like as far as internally, how we can make that happen. So for me, that was my story behind going from not wanting to be a nurse coming out of high school to getting a chance to be a chief operating officer. And now I've been in that role for right at 1 year in a rural market. So that's the Tim Freeman, healthcare travel from bedside to boardroom, if you will.
That is absolutely incredible. First off, thank you for that introduction. And I think it's so important to recognize when we look back in hindsight how the dots perfectly connect. But sometimes when we're going through, you mentioned several things I'd like to highlight. You mentioned the word mentorship and how people along the way became your mentors, allowing you to reflect on your journey, allowing you, even your parents, your father, you would go back to him and ask for advice. And even in those small, maybe even short conversations, because it's certainly happened to me before, but it really can change the trajectory literally of our life in such a positive and profound way. And to go during your journey, as you mentioned, to go back to school to get your MBA while still working, I mean, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, to juggle that. But your ambition along the way, I mean, really, those are the things I was thinking about, is that you really are your character stands out to always have that drive, that sense of ambition to better yourself. I talk about that all the time, is each and every day I'm trying to get better and better, no matter what it is. And so it really is, it's such an inspiring story, Timothy. And I really do, I want to hold on to this, as you had mentioned, bedside to boardroom. Now, was there any particular pivotal moments that now, as you reflect back, maybe they were lessons learned along the way that have helped you in this current role as COO? What really stands out now as you reflect back on your journey?
Yeah. I will say, I don't think it's any one particular moment. I definitely think, inflection points along the way. You mentioned dots earlier, how they kind of connect. For me, I think the very beginning was just going back to ICU in that first manager role. It's the first one you ever take on. It's the most memorable one. And for us, we were just in a position where we're so supported that we built, we started out with building a team, built those pipelines. And that's what allowed us to put people in place, as far as our leadership team between David Lawmeyer, Kim Johnson, Casey Hughes, Seth Engelman, Josh McCall, all these people that, it's very challenging to keep people at the bedside. And that's one thing that I will say is unique, especially with the ICU, or at least the challenge that we had, for better and for worse, pros and cons. you get folks like Aaron Montover, who in the interview, very first day he interviewed, I said, what do you want to do in this unit? He says, I want to be the best nurse that you hire. And so for a fact, in order to get an ICU, you've got to have a certain level of skill set with that nurse. They got to be able to think independently, think high level, think fast. And what happens is you go out and get these people, and they usually come with enough ambition that they don't like level out there. They usually want to keep going. And so that's either a nurse practitioner school, CRNA schools. They want to go back, become a manager themselves or a leader, or they want to get into education like Sarah Reeves. So you've got these folks that's, I think, the biggest challenge, especially in that market. Similar with med-surg, you get people that start there and then they want to continue to grow. And so there's an expected, permissive turnover rate, if you will. But it also allows you to kind of pick out, okay, we've got some, very formalized leadership and we've got some informal leaders. And then you want to tag on to those people that that's their passion. And I remember at one point having a conversation with one of the urologists actually in town, Dr. Buffy Boyd. And she said, who are those nurses that you respect the most? And I said, well, it's Kevin Knight, it's Kim Johnson, it's Kira McCartney. And at that time, all associate degrees. They've since gone on and gotten their BSNs, but you really start thinking about, okay, how do I build a team around people that I have respect for, that I look at and say, these are the people, the pinnacle of what they do. So that's a big part of it. How do you build that team? But what happened is, we built that team and I watched how that turned into creating a wait list. And I watched how that turned into improving what we call hospital acquired infections or hospital acquired conditions. And so your rates of Foley catheter infections goes down, your rate of central line infections goes down, and your rate of ventilator associated infection goes down. Patient outcomes go up, and you see that HCAP scores or your patient experience scores go up. All those things start happening, and then you start to feel the momentum behind. We've changed the culture here, and then you get to a point where you can change the culture enough that you can kind of picky and choosy with the level of talent that you want. But it's not just the talent itself, it's beyond that. It's people you want to work with. So yeah, it's little things like that. And then you just continue to grow and learn. But it's a great feeling when you could have a department, somebody says, hey, I want to come work where you're at.
That is absolutely incredible, Timothy. And, I must say, I am very impressed of all of the names that you have literally remembered along your journey, and to give credit to those people, because I really do. I think it's so important that when we do achieve those milestones, that we take time to really reflect upon those who either were there, like I said, for that short conversation to help us develop as a person, or even simply words of encouragement. And, I was speaking about your character, and how I think what's so interesting is that we see individuals who are so incredibly ambitious, but I always love understanding, where does your ambition stem from?
Wow. That's a really good question. I've heard people say things about departments as you want to leave it better than you found it. I've heard people say things like you want to be better today than you were yesterday. So I think there always is a passion to be better and a desire to be better. One thing I will say as far as people that I mentioned earlier, I remember when I first got started, I've always enjoyed self-help books, just personal finance and that kind of stuff. But I give credit to Josh McCall. He's one of the first guys that told me, you've got to start reading. And I was just like, man, after college the last time, I just, after nursing school, you just lose interest in it. But he was like, no, you've got to start reading it. So I got an Audible set up. And, when you start pursuing books and learning about people and things that they've done and how they did it, I think that is a big part of what continues to fuel your enthusiasm for wanting to get better. And then you learn something you want to share with somebody. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Just trying to be better, better today than you were yesterday.
That is absolutely fantastic. And I could certainly relate to that. Coming out of college, I could remember coming home and I just felt whatever, 21, 22 years old, and you just know everything. You don't need to pick up a book, right? You don't need to educate yourself more. And I remember my father, reflecting back, there was one particular conversation that we had, and he just told me, he goes, even if it's current events, if it's literally reading a book, like you said, on leadership, but opening up your eyes to different topics, different disciplines, because I really do. I think that's important in life, especially, of course, as you mentioned, in leadership roles, of understanding people, understanding really like what motivates them, what inspires them to do like incredible work within their role. And I really like how you mentioned that though, just that sense of continuation of learning. And speaking of like just trying to educate myself in different disciplines and fields. Healthcare, I can only say I was in pharmaceutical sales for a short stint. So certainly not my high level of expertise, but I always like reading upon different fields. Now, I do understand can sometimes be that there's maybe workplace shortages within healthcare. And you mentioned like really focusing on culture. How do you overcome those types of challenges at large when you hear people discussing this, and how you, as well as your team, could really kind of rally behind to change the culture to ensure that employees really do want to be there, that they enjoy their job, even under those pressure situations?
Yeah, man, that's really good. So, I'll say I think first and foremost, start small. Get it all the way down to, I'm not an engineer by any means, but get it all the way down to the smallest level, which is you find the person who you think is probably one of the best assets on your team, that they are the individual that exemplifies what you want to build a team around. And then I think it's all about relationship with that person. You get to understand them, the challenges they face, maybe ask, why do they come to work with such a positive attitude? Why are they so, even when things are so stressful, how do they maintain a level of composure where they're happy to help people? But you start small there and you build a relationship. And I think a lot of it goes back to what Stephen Covey said, which is trust. The speed of trust. The sooner you can build trust, I just told somebody the other day, part of it is you can't fix everything in a day. Sometimes you can't even fix everything in a year. But if people trust that you have their best interest at heart, I think they're a little more willing to follow your lead or understand the challenges that you have. So I think that's where a big part of it is. And that just all goes back to relationships and getting to know people. I will say the challenge behind that is when you're in a direct supervisor role, you can build those relationships with all your frontline, employees or the people that you work with. As you grow in a leadership role, you find yourself a little more distant at every level. So you've really got to be intentional about sharing what your vision is, or learning from your team frontline pain points that they have in order to continue to push up and push down knowledge. But you've got to do a lot more work behind motivating, your directors or your managers so that it filters down. There's no replacement for walking around and shaking hands and meeting people and checking on patients yourself. Being a frontline person, that goes a long way, and that's super important. But I think the biggest thing is when you get up in the leadership scale, you find yourself tied with tied to more things. It's hard to find that time to have an individual personalized relationship with every single person that reports to you. So you got to rely on your leadership structure, which I think goes back to relationships again, so that they understand how important it is to you and that they can continue to reinforce that with their team.
No, that's excellent. And I know that advice and just your experience could certainly kind of travel into other industries, other disciplines, because trust, like as you mentioned the word trust, I was so excited that you said that word, because I've been thinking a lot about these changing and evolving, like rapidly evolving, should I say, landscapes with technology. So AI, just general like technological advancements, but this idea that, you really do, you have to have that sense of trust, especially with those employees, as you mentioned, and the ability, I think of in cases, especially when you're in those leadership roles, but the ability, I know when I was like growing up, and those who I trusted the most, when they provided me that sense of like constructive feedback, I knew that it was in my best interest to take that advice, but it really does. It begins with the trust and the development of those professional relationships initially. When you lay that solid foundation, that that leader, that manager, when they come to you and they want you, that they want you to become better in that role or to maybe even advance, but you have that trust laid to say, hey, you know what, maybe this is my strength. Yay. Like, hoorah there. But then on the flip side of the coin, like, yeah, you know what, looking even back of my own personal self, of being honest with yourself that maybe there is room for, those weaknesses to be improved. And so I love how you mentioned that word trust, such a key, like, point today with all those, like I said, technological advancements, that you have that centered trust on a team. And Timothy, as we move forward, I would love to understand, like, how did Career Connector, how did that develop? You're still obviously within healthcare, but yet you've also started this and you have a passion for this. So allow us just insight into your journey into Career Connector.
Absolutely, and I'm super excited to talk about it. It's one of those things that when you first start out and you get a job, you don't really think too much about the process behind getting it. I think having been on the side of the table to make so many job offers to see how it can change somebody's life, it's a very different feeling. But for me, I'll try to keep the timeline consistent here because it's a lot of different moving parts. But going from the ICU where you're very much focused on taking care of the patient at bedside. And that is very much what you learn in nursing school, even from, sim labs now, technology and sim labs and the training that they do. A lot of it's the turn, cough, deep breathe, we're going to prevent pneumonia. Or if you have a dressing change, we're going to give pain medicine ahead of that. Or if we just are post-op, we're going to work on the incentive spirometer. It's all these things that are very nursing centric. And then what happens is when you're coming out of nursing school, coming to the ICU, it is a normal transition. People understand that it makes sense. It's what they went to school for. And so you have the ability to grow quicker. And so that's what we did in ICU. We talked to the team and said, we're going to build this pipeline with Georgia Southern. But it was already in place, but we just wanted to be what I called the premier unit. We wanted to be the ones to always take nursing students to have a space for them so they felt welcomed. And so if you like it and they felt welcome and you like them, well, that's an easy job interview because they just come to me and say, hey, this person's really good. We want them on the team. And so you make them an offer. And so that's how you can kind of grow a little quicker, especially when you're competing for talent. I tried that same thing in the operating room. And, Mary Owen, I go back to her. She's one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life as far as nursing goes, and even outside of nursing. But she was my original nurse educator. And then I had a chance to go back later and work with her when I was in the manager role. She was still the educator. And it was just, there was for her, she was so calm. No matter what went on, she always had an answer for it. And it was the right answer. So learning from her, I'm going back and I'm repeating the process where I'm bringing people in that have gone through nursing school, trying to encourage them, show them about the unit, or not the unit, but the OR, tell them what we did and how it works and explain the schedule. So orientation in the OR is 6 months long. For us, every service line, you get a month. And within every service line, you break that down to physician experience. And so you work with a surgeon in particular in that service line for a week. And so it's no short process. So big commitment on the front end if you say you want to be an OR nurse. Well, what happened is I had 6 people that I hired. And in the first 2 weeks, 2 of them came back to me and said, not at all what I thought it was, not for me. At the 3-month mark, 2 more came back and said, hey, we really tried to stick with it, thinking maybe like it would just take some getting used to. It's not what we went to school for. It's not for us. Because when you go into the OR, you're not doing the stethoscope on the back. You have anesthesia that does that stuff. And so a lot of what you do as an OR nurse, you're preparing, you're planning, you're prepping, you're making sure preference cards are accurate. Do you have everything that you need? You're counting instruments with the scrub tech. You're moving patients between PACU, day surgery. It's just a very different skill set. But at the end of that 6-month mark, the last 2 people came back and said, hey, we really thought we could make it. It's just not what we want to do. And so we're going to step aside. So for me, when we went, I have a weekend, many months later in South Bend, we go over to the Idea Center. Ryan Krieger gives a presentation on student startups. And afterwards, I said, I would have really loved if somebody, like if those students at post-graduation could have talked to somebody who was an OR nurse beyond the recruiter and beyond me as the manager with an end goal to try and get them, employed. He said, that's an interesting idea. I think you should pursue it. So that's really what started Career Connector, was the idea behind what if, rather than me being, sort of this middleman where somebody says they're interested in a career path and I try to find someone who has that career path and put them together, have a conversation, somebody could go on their own time, or if they're coming out of high school, go on there with their parents. But for me, my network growing up in the high school, era was my parents' network. My job shadowing experience in high school was a CRNA because we went to church with a guy named Jeff Grooms. And so it was easy play. But for people that are interested in CRNAs or that career path that don't know one, how can they really explore what a day in the life looks like? And it is such a big investment on the front end behind getting into nursing school, commitment through nursing school, going to the ICU, going to CRNA school. You do all that, it's 10 plus years. And then you find out at the conclusion, I didn't really want to sit in a cold OR for the rest of my life. Well, that's a challenging time to realize that. So Not everybody figures it out along the way. Some people, a little further in it, but not just with healthcare. With stuff like being an architect. Being an architect is no small career path, and if you start it, you get so far down the path, and it's like there's not other jobs you can really jump to once you get so far down a particular career path, in particular with education. So my thought was, what if we create a marketplace platform? So you've got one group of people that if they're interested in a career path, before they have to commit anything, they can get a real, candid, open, honest, these are the challenges with this career. This is what I liked about school. This is what I didn't like about school. These are my opportunities post-school. And for the person who's a professional, oftentimes you get like a pharmacist who may not want to commit an additional 12-hour shift during the week, but they've got a skill set that really doesn't quite fit in with DoorDash or with Uber, or with some of these, other, gig economy career opportunities to make money. So what if they could just use their experience as a PharmD, maybe PGY1, PGY2? And if you've got somebody who's really interested in chemistry, they may not want to go to medical school, but they don't have a pharmacist that they could just get that exposure from. They could go on there, book a call, and for the professional, they can charge their own rates, set their own hours. And so it works like a gig economy on the professional side. So I would say it's a matchmaking service, but it's really a career path matching service, because if you don't know if you like accounting or not before you go to accounting school, why not talk to an accountant and just see, is it what you think it is? Because oftentimes I think we kind of pull what we see on TV or in the movies as our interpretation of that career path. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but you'd be better off to talk to somebody that's lived it to give you their, I guess their experience of the role.
Is incredible, because seriously, everything that you were saying from the very beginning, what we know within our own ecosystem growing up, whether it is the parents' influence or what they did growing up, you kind of naturally slide in. And so I'm relating so much to this platform and how much it is needed. Not to mention, another advantage for this platform is, just the price, the cost of higher education. And the fact that if you could, from high school, if you could at least have just like a better understanding of what is out there. Because I know, like I said, I was lost even into my late 20s, let alone high school. But at least if I could kind of shave off a couple years to say, you know what, even if I try some of these, I'm still going to be young enough to pivot and everything. But you have a more clear idea as to the major that you want, and that major goes to better use because you've kind of already picked apart, like you said, if you have these conversations, even if they're 10 minutes or so forth, but it could really help narrow in your focus. So I absolutely love this. And you mentioned, I did hear you say high school, but how young does this go? Or is it literally up to the person that you're reaching out to as the mentor, what they're willing to speak to as far as age?
I think at this point, we don't really have a cap on it. I definitely, if you're at the point where you're thinking about exploring genuine career paths, I would think, late high school, post high school. But you can even take it into a field where, and I've used the example before, if you think you want to be a physician assistant, you think you want to be a nurse practitioner, because you don't want to spend the money, the time, the effort in medical school, but you don't want to do bedside nursing. So you want to be more that middle provider, area. They look very similar up front, but they're very different in practice. And so that would be one of those things where if you're torn between two career paths, you could ask, each one, you could book a call with a PA and book a call with a nurse practitioner and get their take on it. And so it helps you kind of dial in, is, even in one particular, vein, is it what you're looking for? And if it is, maybe you have to further narrow it down between two things. But I think, for the platform itself, for setup, I would say, I'm not going to discourage anybody that's 17, wants to get on there with their parents and talk to somebody that they might be interested in work as a lineman or an electrician. Definitely talk to them and see if it's what you think it is. But yeah, I would say we're open at any particular age. We've also got some career counselors on there as well. So even if you're trying to talk to somebody to dial in what's my path before you book a call with a particular, profession, they can help give you some insight also.
This is incredible. And I just have to ask you one question off of exactly what you were saying, but you're mentioning a couple different industries or career paths. Is it pretty broad in general? It's not only maybe, like you said, trade schools and healthcare, but does it kind of go pretty broad as far as this?
That was our challenge when I first started out. In particular, when you're starting out with this with an idea like this, the ideas are exciting because they can get really big really fast. But what happens is you've just got logistical constraints, and so you say, okay, I got to dial this into like what makes sense. But currently, we've got it set up for 17 different industries. And in each one of those industries, like healthcare is an industry, you've got your subcategories where you could have a physician on there, or nurse practitioner, your PA, pharmacist, different things. Law enforcement, same thing. We've got people that have been on the DEA on there, or if you're interested in FBI. But it's broad, even up to and include people in athletics. That was one of the things originally I did not plan on putting in there. We had 16 industries, and we kind of concluded that as a good stopping point. But as soon as I said stop there, the very next day, I had a gentleman reach out to me and said, hey, I'd love to be on your platform. I'm a former, professional basketball player. I don't see a spot for me. If you ever have a spot, can you fit me in? So immediately email to the developers. I said, you got to add one more. But we've also included a professional athletic spot on there. And I even have a person that I work with now. His son is being recruited by 15 different Division I athletic programs. And so when you get to the point where you've got 15 options, it's really hard to say, okay, I got to narrow this down. But for him, I said, why don't you call this guy that's on the platform? Great guy. He's been through the process, and maybe he can just give you some ideas that when you go to these different colleges, questions that he would say you want to ask that you may or may not have thought of before to help kind of dial in some stuff. And so he booked a call afterwards. He said to me, probably one of the most interesting calls he's ever had, but he was like, he gave me insight on a number of things I should be asking I had not even thought of before. But it's just that kind of stuff that when you talk to somebody who's been down a particular path, even if they were great in high school, they get a college setup or a scholarship, or they go through college, even if they've done time in professional athletics, if you think you're in a position where you want to play football, if you're in the NFL, it's really hard to find, football players who are willing to talk to you, if you don't know them. But on this platform, if you've got somebody who's already set up a profile and says, yeah, I played 2 years for the Houston Texans, and I'd be more than happy to tell you about my experience, you can book a call and get answers. That's the kind of stuff that I think helps people as far as like creating access infrastructure, that you've got people out there who always say, I'm willing to help, I'm willing to coach, I'm willing to mentor. And I think their time should come with some sort of compensation because they're blocking it out. But at the same time, you've got people who have all these questions and they don't know who to ask other than, you can go on Google, you can go on ChatGPT, but so much of that stuff is just static. It's back and forth. This opens up the dynamic, I think, conversation for a Q&A back and forth to help people really figure out, how do I get to the next step, which is important.
Timothy, this is huge. Like literally, this is huge because even as you're mentioning, I reflect upon my journey. I reflect upon when you specifically were beginning to speak about sports, athletics in general, especially at the collegiate level. I look back and my collegiate experience as an athlete, so different than what we're seeing now, of course, with NIL and heavy social media. I was at the time, I remember like entering college and social media was there, but it was not really like too much of it. It was like, oh, do you have Facebook? Like it wasn't quite there. Some people were already on it. I certainly was not, as you could hear me speaking. But I say this because I think it's so incredibly important that, students they have the opportunity to kind of look into the future and at least prepare for what is to come, especially as you mentioned at those D1 levels, the sense of professionalism, even that is needed. Like, what should you start building when you're in high school if you're already getting called by, like you said, that individual, 15 schools? That's unbelievable. Truly incredible accomplishment there. But I really do. I love how you have kind of just flourished into what you said. I believe it was 17 different industries. Speaking from like more of the athletics background, I could say that is certainly 100 and like 50% needed. So congratulations to you, Timothy, with that. And just holding on to this topic of career connectors. But when you look into the future, like whatever, 5, 10, 15 something odd years, this vision that comes into play, like what do you ultimately desire to achieve?
I think the idea would be people feel more comfortable and they feel more confident with decisions they make. So that they don't feel like they're going through this career exploration pathway where it just depends on random chance for who happens to be at work when they're at work, who happens to be interested in the work that they do, who they bump into and rub elbows with, the type of I don't want people to feel like they're having to figure it out on their own in real time. And, I look at the opportunity, like if for me, it was great because I had a chance to ask people these questions all along the way. But if you could take somebody who may not have that opportunity, they could go back to the very beginning. And before they start making the first step in what direction do I want to go, can they get some insight? That's why I say career clarity, because you may learn at the very beginning that one particular career path that does not interest you at all after talking to somebody who says, this is what I do. And for example, for me, it'd be a great opportunity if I had a career, like an airline pilot on there. People could say, I love flying planes. And they may say, great, because that's exactly what you do. And there's pros to it. And you think, oh, wow, that sounds wonderful. Or you may find out you spend a lot more time away from home and you might enjoy being at home. And so that would be one of those things where you say, okay, maybe being an airline pilot is not for me. Or you may say, I love being on the road and I want to travel. And so that's the perfect opportunity. But I think asking people who do the work gives somebody some insight into it long before they have to trial and error, if you will. So that's what it is. Less trial and error, more career satisfaction. And I think I'd like to make the prediction that if you can get that satisfaction early in your career and you know what you want, it will lead to a lot more years of a fulfilling career path and more enjoyable career time.
I mean, hands down, truly, this is going to be revolutionizing. I'm serious when I say this because, when you're talking about I think about college students and expectations, just as you mentioned, you may think that, okay, you're getting this major, you maybe have your first internship, or maybe you haven't even entered your internship yet. But when you think of sporting events, a lot of sporting events are on weekends. And just as you mentioned, do you desire to have a family where you have open free weekends and you haven't even thought that far into it? I'm telling you what, the time that is going to be able to be saved for students, for high school students, even financially, entering into the cost of higher education or medical degrees, right? So I am all about this. This is definitely needed. You're certainly filling that gap. I think about, even from my experiences, I'm offering obviously some lived experience as far as just feedback, but it was so real. If only in my 20s, I could have had a better understanding, should I say, of what is actually out there and how it connects with my strengths. But then also too, yikes, I do have weaknesses. How is this actually going to line up? Absolutely amazing software that you have here. And, Timothy, I think about when you're putting an idea together, but then when it actually takes hold in the marketplace, what has been maybe some lessons, or maybe it's just a lesson that you learned from idea to then creating this and it's an actual reality now. It is a working database.
Wow, yeah, that's great. So first off, I'll say ideas are exciting.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have them. Execution is difficult. It is a far different path to actually bring something into existence, with all the creativity. For me, I had a great team of developers that I worked with, and it took about a year to bring it from where, my concept was in my mind to an actual working marketplace that you could go online, pull it up and book calls. But I'll say, be patient with yourself. And that's one of those things that you can be ambitious, but man, sometimes it doesn't matter how ambitious you are. You just still have to be patient with yourself. And the other thing I'll say too is working a full-time job Monday through Friday, and then, making this my hobby to start out with, in the afternoons or on the weekends as you try to build it out. It's okay to just have fun with it. That's one thing that I will say has been a big takeaway for me is, and one reason why I intentionally designed Career Connector the way I did, pulling me out as the middleman, if you will, the middle person, is because you can't spend all your time in work Monday through Friday and then spend all your time working on the weekends. You've got to find some time to take care of yourself as a human being, whether that's going for a walk, whether that's, making sure you to spend time, cooking good food, whether that's spending time with your family, with your spouse. You got to make sure you take care of yourself in there as well. So I got really into it on the weekends for a while during that year. And that's all I did on the weekends was spend time just putting things together, building the social media out for it. But you also got to, pay attention to yourself and take care of yourself as well. And realize, when you're pushing towards a maximum limit and when you need to take a break from things. And I would say so much more about enjoying the process than trying to figure out how can I generate revenue. I mean, the generation of revenue will come in time, but it's all about enjoying building it out, and also too getting to know people along the way. I mean, that's been super exciting. Even you and I connecting on LinkedIn over this business is the people that I met along the way. One of the coolest people that I have mad respect for was Baby Joe Macy, who is a boxer out of Buffalo, New York. And even when he, stumbled upon it, I had a call with him. It was one of the most exciting opportunities for me, was just to be able to talk to him on the phone, because as a kid growing up in the 90s, I remember watching him on ESPN Friday Night Fights, and then now to have a conversation with him. And his story is interesting because he works in medical sales post boxing. So once again, going back to your thing about, even after athletics and careers, how do you find a career path? If all you've ever done is one particular sport, what do you do after that? And so it opens up all these different doors. But I would say that's, once again, you just make sure you take care of yourself as well. Don't lose taking care of yourself somewhere along the.
No, excellent advice that comes on the podcast as far as like a topic of discussion a lot is, this idea of it can be a couple things. It could be work-life balance. It could be work-life integration. I know there's so many different perspectives out there, but I do I've been reflecting a lot, slowing down, and how actually when you slow down sometimes to really reflect upon how far you have come, just kind of glancing into the future, not enough to bring anxiety, but just glancing into the future and where you would like to be, like setting short-term goals and long-term goals, how sometimes when you have that sense of clarity, you actually end up speeding up even that much more as a positive side, because you have literally more clarity, more direction, more meaning behind like that sense of intention of where you do want to go. And so I've been reflecting a lot, because my whole life, I feel like it's been just like 100 miles per hour. And I'm sure you could relate as well. But it really is. I think it's when we actually spend time to kind of relax, to think about those goals. Certainly, like you said, if it's like a hobby on a weekend, pursuing the things that you have to, like Monday through Friday, but that you enjoy the journey. And I'm so happy that you mentioned that, Timothy, is the relationship building. That was something, like starting the podcast, I've been so incredibly grateful for the people. It almost, I think I could arguably say this, at the center of every industry is the people, right? Even with the technology coming full force, as we know, it's always going to be, at the end of the day, like about the people and the interactions that we have. And so, I mean, phenomenal advice. And what you're doing with Career Connector, I am all about. There is definitely a need for it. And I also now I want to take just a step back, because we love talking about just leadership lessons. And I know your expertise, obviously, even current day as a COO, is in healthcare as a healthcare executive. Now, what types of leadership traits present day are you looking for someone who's climbing up the ranks, specifically maybe within healthcare administration?
Yeah, well, man, that's a really good question too. I think the quote that always comes back is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I'll tell you, there's a program out there, and Alan Nelson was one of my professors at Notre Dame, and he's part of an admired leadership. And, they kind of always, look at this third way. So, are leaders born, are leaders trained? And one thing I like that they talk about is, leadership really is it's actually a set of behaviors that people see the behavior and they recognize that as what leaders do. So I think that's an interesting thought. But, I will say, I believe it comes down to, you've got to care. Because if you really genuinely care, if something happens after 5:30, after 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night and somebody calls you, you won't see it as a bother. But if you are just trying to get into it for what you think is money, or what you think is a title, or what you think is opportunity, every call after 5 p.m. is just going to lead to frustration. So I would say that, to me, that's one of those things that I've never wanted anyone to call me after hours and feel like, I don't know if he's going to, quote unquote, blow up on me. I don't want anybody to ever think when they call, they're not sure what version they're going to get of, is he going to be upset? Because I'll tell you what my impression on that is it leads to people not calling because they don't want to bother you. And so I would say, as long as you can keep the genuineness of the same person, no matter what scenario, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's challenging, whether it's a win, I'm not saying you have to be monotone all the time, but as long as you can keep some continuity and have the ability to maintain composure, I think that's going to be huge. So I think calmness under pressure would be a big one. There's a term for it that a friend of mine gave me a long time ago. I'm drawing a blank on the term, but temperament, that's it. I knew if I said I couldn't remember it come to me. But he said, I think you got the right temperament. And I think that's one thing you look for with people is the right temperament, because a lot of people have the skill set already, but it's about the right fit as well. I think that's one thing I've learned from books about CEOs, whether they're the good CEO or the company is the company. It's all about where is the company at in transition? Where is the CEO at with their experience, and what kind of CEO are they? And is it a good fit? I'll quote Dr. Foley. He's a general surgeon that wrote me a letter of recommendation when I thought I wanted to be a flight nurse. And his whole take on it was, Tim, there are plenty of people that have the skill set to be flight nurses. He said, it's not about having the skill set. He says it's about being able to get along with people, because you're going to be in a tight space with them for very long periods of time. If you're not the kind of guy that can take things in stride and be easygoing and work well with people, it's just going to be a hard fit. But I remember him saying that, and I thought, yeah, that's a good point. If you're in a small helicopter, you're in it for a long time, you better hope you're able to get along with the people that are in there. Same thing could be said for an OR room, because they're so small. But yeah, I've always thought that was interesting. So I think that's trust first and foremost, because you don't have trust, you don't have a good relationship. And then beyond that, are you the kind of person that people feel like they want to work with and that they enjoy working with? And then, I'm not saying you have to close off the opportunities, but, when things come up and the one consistent in life is change, are you the kind of person that says, yeah, let's see how we can continue to work around it with what you talk about all the time, positivity, an optimistic approach, having the ability to say, yeah, we're going to have challenges, but that's not going to set us back, and we're not going to get disgruntled about it. And we're not going to dig our heels in. We're just going to say, hey, this is the challenge for today. I enjoy the people I'm working with. We're going to figure out a solution to it, because guess what? Tomorrow is going to have another challenge, and we're going to figure that one out too. But you got to have that type of roll with it, work on it, genuineness, I think, along the way. And I think those are the qualities I feel like, maybe not just in healthcare, but in any executive role, I feel like would be a good fit for somebody who's looking to grow in that direction in their career.
That's excellent advice. And, I really do. I think this topic of discussion, more generally speaking to amongst different industries, but I've been reading a lot of articles that, yes, you may have to have a certain level of, technicality for that job, but a lot of employers are really starting to focus on, they're actually called like one of two things that we probably know them as soft skills, but I've been hearing the term called power skills, if you will, like
Okay. Yeah.
same thing, but it was interesting to me. I just stumbled upon it. But I really do, when you talk about collaboration, teamwork, positivity, literally having just a positive mindset that even, yes, when things are going, not so great, or, there's challenges at the moment, but how to stay calm, how to still work well with that team under pressure. Excellent, excellent advice there, Timothy. And I really do like your background is so incredibly unique of having this healthcare experience, obviously at the executive level, but then you're an innovator. You now have career connectors. And so kind of combining these, incredible traits, to be able to bring back to the boardrooms. So my question for you is, as you've created career connectors, that sense of like innovation, the leadership that you have brought from career connectors, how has maybe that crossed over into your role currently as COO?
Wow. Be open to change, and then, just be open to the creativity that comes with it. People often say think outside the box, and sometimes I think we all live outside the box. But I think there's an element of comes with it, which is, I heard somebody say, and I wish I could remember who said it to give them the quote, but it was something to the effect of, once I took on my first manager job, my role just became 95% troubleshooting. Then I thought, man, that is so true. Like the first time you step into the role, it literally just becomes troubleshooting. And as long as you can maintain a positive approach and an optimistic, outlook, you're just troubleshooting all day long. And that doesn't mean you're going to have the answer to every question. And it's okay to say, I don't have the answer, but you know what? I'm going to look into it and get back with you. Sometimes that's a big part of it. Nobody's expected to have, I guess, unless you're, in a time crunch. Nobody's expected to have the answer for every problem they're presented with immediately. And I don't think we have that expectation that we put on others, but for some reason, I think by default, we always tend to put it on ourselves as somebody brought me a challenge and I got to figure out how to solve it right now. But it's okay to say, you know what, either I'm going to think on it and get back to you, or, I need to get some more information. Let me look at that. But I think that's a part of it is it's okay not to have all the answers. And that's one thing I will say too, that I feel like as you continue to grow in leadership, it's like and I'll use the sports analogy. It's like the playbook has less and less written pages and more blank pages, because sometimes you're just finding out like, okay, there's no specific, explanation for how we're going to do this. But let's get some good minds around the room and figure out how can we do it, which goes back to making sure you got the right team around you and people that they have strengths to support your weaknesses and have a positive outlook. And so all that, I guess, what is it, the MBA term they would use, the synergies, that's what you really need. You want people that you want in the boat with you, that are going to keep the outlook and the approach so that you're not, pulling people down, if you will, or just getting kind of ho-hum about stuff. But yeah, that's a big one.
Well, Timothy, thank you so much. And this has been a phenomenal podcast episode. I cannot wait to get this out to listeners. I would love to wrap this podcast episode up with a positive message or a particular positive quote, because this has certainly been a very positive episode.
So for me, I'm going to steal one, but that goes back to Alan Nelson and in our MBA program. And the question was, what do leaders do? And he said, leaders make people and situations better. And I just thought, man, that is right on. That's what I want to do. It kind of goes back to, the original, calmness under pressure, element in the OR, kind of goes back to wanting people to have a better day than I had in the ICU. But ultimately, I think and a big part of this is you got to take yourself out of the position and you got to put somebody else in that role that you want to improve things for someone else. I think that's what makes it more fulfilling. And I'll quote Josh McCall again, because he just hammered it into me every day. But he said, there's anything you can do anything with a positive mental attitude. So if you keep positive mental approach, and I thought about it so many times in life, Monday is just like Tuesday is just like Wednesday. So why is Monday different than Wednesday? I think sometimes it just comes down to a positive approach, an optimistic mindset, that as you say, today is going to be a good day and I'm going to have a good day. Then, I'm not trying to say like, see it, be it, if you will, but your approach, I think sometimes can be contagious to those around you who say, I like the fact that you don't want to be overly, positive, where you tend to not see like the realistic things happening around you at a time. I mean, nobody wants to stay inside a burning building. But at the same time, if you have that positive approach, make people's situations better. And I would say, if you look for ways to do that, you'll probably see them sooner than you think.
Wow, you said it best. And I really do. I've always spoke about positivity and that light, that it really is. It's a choice that we make every day. That is not saying that the day before was perfect, that we're waking up, and just this like perfect mindset, but it really is. I do think it's about taking that active choice. And what you mentioned, I learned what I'm about to say in sports at a young age, but that sense of like ripple effect, that when you bring that positive attitude, it really does. It has this ability to have this ripple effect with those that are around us, even if something has not gone right. But it's the same as negativity that could also lead to, as we know, a ripple effect as well. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that, Timothy, that it really is. It comes down to like making that choice in life each and every day.
I will tell you on the sports analogy side of things, it's just like, and as a huge Buffalo Bills fan, have been for many, 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 many years, back to Jim Kelly. It's just something about seeing Josh Allen run on the field, fourth quarter, you're down by a few and you think, we got this. And the reason for that is he's got a positive, he believes we got this. And so when your leaders say we got this, it just ripple effects. It's hard to count them out.
100%. Well, Timothy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and just sharing your incredible career path. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's inspiring that you're innovating. You're in a very high level, of course, executive position in healthcare. And just to be able to pick your brain today, truly honored and grateful to be able to do that. So thank you so much, Timothy.
Hey, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Definitely the highlight of the day.
Thank you, Timothy.